No one really knows who he is, or what he was. He came into the lands between like every other tarnished before him, but he had no interest in becoming the lord. Oh no, he's just looking for his next meal. Beasts, all Venorics, tarnished, and even kindred of rot. There is no flesh which he has not tasted. In fact, he has developed a knack for cooking up his own recipes. With an axe for firewood and a knife for the bone, he is equipped for the prep work. With some rowa seeds here and some mushrooms over there, he can create some exquisite platters. Compliments to the chef, the Voracious Eater, a pure dexterity build that focuses on cleaving enemies up close while taking advantage of his monstrous voice to empower his strikes. Big damage, big screams, and just a dash of prayer give this cook everything he needs. As always, we will review the stats of this build, the equipment that we use, and of course its applications within the game. Since there is a lot of ground to cover, I have created timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier to navigate the content and give you the opportunity to skip straight to the part that interests you the most. Let's get started. This is a PvE focused build that works well in both solo and jolly cooperation. The objective of this build is to subdue all enemies. This means breaking their stances, knocking them to the ground, and wearing them down from a distance. Combining the stance-breaking power of a great axe alongside the damage and utility of different roars in the game, this character is capable of stun-locking most enemies that it will find on the battlefield. Close-range power as well as long-range options make this character an all-around melee monster. On top of this, we make sure to generate plenty of defenses through high HP and some support incantations, which will let us take a few hits in order to return them with interest. This is an unusual spin to dexterity builds, but has shown to be very good at what it does. To reach this objective, we will be running the following stats. Start the game as a vagabond. This class is the most efficient to reach the required stat block for this build, allowing us to make use of every rune level possible to its maximum potential. As the primary focus of this build is PvE, I have chosen to base it on rune level 150. Finally, this is the stats blocks that you want to end up with. 60 Vigor, 35 Mind, 12 Endurance, 14 Strength, plus 2 from the Omen's Merc Mask, for a total of 16. 80 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 12 Faith, and 7 Arcane. There are many ways to reach these stats. Level up however you feel comfortable. That said, I do recommend that you take the following path. As soon as you are in the lands between, the first thing to do is get your vigor to 20. Survivability is more important than damage when you're just starting out a character. The second priority is to get some tools for the character. In this case, we are interested in bringing Endurance to 12 and Faith to 12. This will give us access to a basic set of incantations that will provide support to the build and set up the needed equip load that it requires. The third priority will be to get Dexterity to 30. This will let us meet the requirements of many more weapons and increase our damage scaling. This will be the main stat for the build. The fourth priority is to get Vigor to 40. This will allow you to survive comfortably throughout the mid-game, allowing you to focus on your other stats. The fifth priority is to get Dexterity to 55. This is the second soft cap for this attribute, and it will maximize the damage that this character can get with Dex, scaling, weapons, and Ashes of War. The sixth priority is to get Mind to 25. With the basis of the build established, this will help us with some more FP. When we increase the amount of times that we can use Ashes of War, we give the build a direct increase to damage. The seventh priority is to top off Vigor at 60. This will put you at our required HP pool, granting you maximum security to withstand the hardest hitting attacks from the end game enemies. The eighth priority is to max out our Dexterity at 80. This is the final soft cap of the skill, and it will round out the damage that all of our weapons do. The ninth and final priority is to bring Mind to 35. With our HP and damage at their soft caps, we now need to increase our FP as much as possible in order to let us use our Ashes of War as often as possible. This will generate a much more prolonged DPS uptime. So, why do we want these final stats? Allow me to explain. Vigor at 60 because I believe it is the perfect amount of health to survive the hardest hitting attacks of PvE. This will give us a total of 1900 base HP. It is the second cap for the stat. Going any higher really diminishes your returns, and I honestly never go any lower. Mind at 35 because it will increase the amount of times that we can use Ashes of War, and this increases our damage. After the rest of the build was min-maxed, I placed every remaining point into this skill. Endurance at 12 because it is the exact amount that this build needs in order to be able to wield the weapons and armor that I chose while staying at a medium load. This is perfectly min-maxed. Any lower and you lose the build. Any higher and you are wasting points. Strength at 16 because it is needed in order to meet the requirements of some key weapons that will increase the power and the versatility of this build. Remember that this build actually has 14 strength and we get a +2 from the Omensmerk Mask armor piece. Dexterity at 80 because it is the main attribute of this build. It will help us with meeting weapon requirements as well as increase the damage of all the weapons and Ashes of War that we will be using. Intelligence at 9 because it is the base level of the Vagabond. We do not increase it at all in this build. Faith at 12 because it allows us to use some key incantations that provide great support to the build. For such a small investment, the benefit that we get is extremely valuable. Finally, Arcane at 7 because it is the base level of the Vagabond. We do not increase it at all in this build. Moving on to the equipment. This is the basic layout of the build. I wanted to make a character that could thrive in melee combat through the use of stance breaks and crits, but also have options when the enemies are at range. Also, this character spends multiple resources in order to optimize the efficiency and the power of all Roar-type Ashes of War. Starting with the main hand, I like to use the Lightning Butchering Knife and a Lightning Misericord. The number one weapon of this build is the Butchering Knife. Honestly, this weapon is perfect. It's fun, it gives us good damage, and it fits the build aesthetic very well. In this case, I chose to go with the Lightning affinity. For whatever reason, this affinity was giving me more damage than the Keen affinity, and since I do not intend on using weapon buffs, this made Lightning the obvious choice. After some research, I saw that there are not that many enemies that resist lightning damage. It's mostly the dragons, and there were a few troublesome ones that are actually weak to it. In this case, I chose the Ash of War Troll's Roar. We will go over this more in detail when we speak about the different roars in the game. For now, let me tell you that this Ash of War was buffed, and it is now very powerful. It does good damage, but it also knocks enemies down and single-handedly staggers them for a crit. It is our main tool for locking down high priority targets and for taking care of groups of smaller enemies. It has fantastic utility. Another good characteristic is the amount of stance damage that this weapon does. I was honestly surprised. It's more than what I expected and very useful for the build. This weapon also has a passive effect that heals us for 1% of our total HP on each hit. Honestly, this is a nice bonus, but it's not something to rely on. It will help mitigate some damage, but overall, we are more interested in the looks and the damage of this weapon. This is definitely a choice I made thinking of the feel of the build, because as a great axe, the weapon does not have a very good moveset. Overall, it's a fun weapon that looks cool and fits the build, but also provides considerable damage that will get through any endgame enemy with no issues. Moving on to the Misericord. This weapon serves two purposes. The first one is obvious, the critical damage. With the highest critical modifier in the game, there are very few weapons that will deal more backstab and riposte damage than the Misericord. Taking into consideration that this build is constantly stance-breaking enemies with the Great Axe and Troll's Roar, this dagger will see a lot of use in your playtime. It is perfect for this build's high burst damage that also sets up additional damage after the knockdown from a riposte or a backstab. I chose the Lightning affinity for this weapon because it gave me the highest amount of damage from the critical hits. Like I mentioned before, not many enemies are resistant to this damage type, so it has served me very well. Finally, I chose the Sacred Order Ash of War for this weapon. This is a back pocket answer to undead enemies. our weapons do not deal a lot of damage to undead due to their damage types, so the damage boost that we get from this Ash of War against this enemy type makes it a very simple solution to that problem. In the offhand, I like to use two other armaments. First is the Highland Axe, and then I like to use the Frenzied Flame Seal. The Highland Axe is a very important tool for the build. First of all, it has a passive effect that increases the damage of all Roar-type Ashes of War by 7.5%. These Roar-type abilities are one of the main tools for this build, and most of our best ways to deal damage will receive this boost. As long as we keep it active in our offhand, the damage increase that it provides will remain active as well. Just based on that, it is a staple on the build. This weapon will be upgraded with the Keen affinity. There are two reasons why we do this. First, I want a pure physical damage option for the cases where lightning damage is no good. These cases do not come up often, but they are there, so it's good to be prepared. The second reason why we use the Keen affinity is because, for whatever reason, this affinity increases the damage of the Ash of War that we use on this weapon. That Ash of War is Beast's Roar. A Roar-type projectile that is cheap to use at only 10 FP, has great range and great damage. As I have said before, this build focuses on increasing the power of these Roar-type abilities, and Beast Roar is one of the most useful one. This is our ranged option. Not only is it good against enemies that we cannot reach with melee attacks, but it is also very good at weakening enemies before they get to our position. Taking into consideration how easy it is to use, this Ash of War is extremely powerful. The other armament in the offhand is the Frenzied Flame Seal. This is one of my favorite seals in the game because it has no weight and no requirements. Any build can use it with no investment at all. Since this build only runs a few support incantations, we do not need to worry about the low incantation scaling. As a result, we get an easy to use, comfortable seal to cast our support spells without the need of using any points to meet the requirements or increasing our equip load. It is perfect for what we need it for. Finally, I want to make an honorable mention to the Iron Cleaver. This is a weapon that I like to keep in my inventory for specific moments. I use the Keen affinity on it in order to keep it pure physical damage, and I like to dual wield it with the Highland Axe against those few enemies that resist lightning damage. Since the dual wield setup is very aggressive at close range, I like to use the Prayerful Strike Ash of War in order to provide some mid-battle healing. All in all, it is not a weapon that I use often, but one that I always want to have available. It has a cool R2 as well. With our weapons out of the way, let's talk about Talismans. This build has a very simple objective when it comes to Talismans. I want to increase the power of all Roar-type abilities in order to maximize damage, and I want to increase my HP as much as possible in order to be able to take a few hits, especially taking into consideration that Troll's Roar has a lot of poise and I will be trading with my enemies. For this reason, we are running the Erdtree Favor +2 and the Crimson Amber Medallion +2 in order to get the HP values, alongside the Shard of Alexander and the Roar Medallion in order to power up our Roar abilities. Altogether, this talisman setup gives us a total of 2134 HP with an increase of 32% to the damage of Roar-type abilities. This setup synergizes with the Highland Axe for a final total of 42% additional damage on our Roar abilities. As you can see, we will be able to take a few hits while we continue our relentless assault of the enemy and maximize our damage with a huge boost to the potency of our most used and most powerful abilities. Alright, let's talk about armor. In this game, armor is extremely important. This is because this game has extremely good looking armor. Fashion Souls or Elden Bling, however you prefer to call it, is at an all-time high. For this build, armor turned out to be the first thing that I chose. This build was created with its look first, and then I chose the stats. The armor combination that you see here is the Omen's Merc Mask, the Omen Killer Robes, the Clean Rot Gauntlets, and the Confessor Boots. Overall, I really like how this setup looks. There is a sinister feeling about it, but it maintains functionality. Once I gave it the butchering knife and the Highland axe, the whole look came together. It inspired the feeling of evil obsession. After that, I made the character an endless consumer of the flesh of all living things, and it became extremely metal. I really enjoy this fashion. All in all, this armor setup gives us a total of 18% physical damage reduction and a total of 37 poise. In terms of defense, this armor combination is not very protective. While this character may not be a glass cannon thanks to its high HP, it is no tank either. When choosing armor, I definitely prioritized the look and the feel of the setup, and the build turned out to be more of a berserker than a knight. When it comes to the spirit summon that we will use for this build, there isn't one that can offer a distinct tactical advantage over others. The build supports any of the summons in the game. You can go with Omen Killer Rolo if you want some carnage that follows the theme, or you can go with Teach for her Black Blade attacks. Anything is possible. As for me, I will always pick the Mimic. If you have seen my other build videos, you know that I will be picking the Mimic 9 times out of 10. There is just way too much value in the Mimic for me. The way I make my builds really increases the usefulness of this summon. In this case, the Mimic will have access to both Troll's Roar and Beast's Roar. This means that it will be able to provide us with close range knockdowns and an incredible amount of stance breaks that we can take advantage of with Misericord hits. But that's not all. The Mimic can seamlessly switch to the Highland axe and start screaming at enemies from behind you, providing range support and damage while you're the one that stance breaks the room. This back and forth with the summon generates a very interesting playstyle. You are capable of dipping in and out of combat, switching it up between close quarter roars and ranged roars depending on your situation. If you see the Mimic is using Troll's Roar, take out Misericord and pay attention. You will be able to crit fish very easily. And if you see the Mimic shouting it out with Beast's Roar, then that is your chance to take advantage of the weakened enemies as they get hit. All in all, there is great synergy here that fully empowers this build's crowd control capabilities. Remember, we don't really have a lot of armor to tank the hits, so it is important to incapacitate enemies as much as possible. Up to this point, we have spoken about the equipment and the armor. We have talked about offense and defense. Up next, we need to talk about the different incantations that I use in order to get the best value from this build. Before we begin, it is important that you, my dear viewer, understand that spell choice is 100% personal. The list of spells that I will show you here is not the absolute best list that you can have. Instead, these are the spells that I prefer to use because they are the ones that suit my playstyle the most. You may think that other spells are better or that I am making the wrong choices. This is okay. Please remember to use any spells that you think are the best or that provides you with the most fun. Remember, all of these spells that I will be showing you can be used with a simple investment of 12 faith. I fully recommend that you make this investment in most, if not all, of your builds. Moving on, I will show you my list of spells and do my best to explain the reasons why I think that they are the most useful. Hopefully, you are able to obtain inspiration from when you are making your own list. Let's take a look. In this build, I use 7 memory slots. I try to keep a short list of key incantations that will make my life easier when using this build. Each spell has a use, and they each shine as an answer to a specific problem. The list of spells that I like to use is as follows: Bestial Vitality, Heal, Magic Fortification, Flame Fortification, Lightning Fortification, Divine Fortification, and Flame Cleanse Me. Bestial Vitality is one of the best healing tools in the game because it is one of the most efficient healing tools in the game. This is a regeneration type spell that heals 5 HP per second for 120 seconds. This is a total of 600 HP over time. At the cost of only 18 FP, this incantation heals 33 HP per FP spent. It will be difficult to find a more efficient healing spell in the game. I have found that this incantation is very useful in this particular build. Since we do not have a lot of armor absorption, we will be taking a bit more damage than usual. This regeneration effect helps mitigate that damage. In fact, we can combine this regeneration effect with the 1% HP heal per hit from the butchering knife in order to extend our resource management. This build will be using the poise of Troll's Roar to trade with the enemy. As such, this incantation helps increase the build's survivability and its comfort. Heal is the only healing spell that I use. That said, its purpose is not exactly to heal myself. In fact, I use this spell for one thing and one thing only: to kill Revenants. Revenants are one of the most powerful and annoying non-boss type enemies that you can find in the game. They deal incredible amounts of damage and are in constant motion and attack. They teleport around the area and, I am sure you know, have that one move where they hit you 1,000,000 times with all of their limbs in succession. It is very difficult to fight them, but fortunately, if you do not let them get started on their offense, then they become much easier to defeat. In order to achieve this, we use heal. Revenants are very weak to holy damage, but also they are extremely weak to healing spells. If you cast a healing spell with an AoE and it catches the Revenant, they will take damage instead of being healed. The amount of damage they take is always the same, about 60% of their total HP. 2 spells will always kill them, and since the first spell also staggers them, it is very easy to cast 2 of them back to back for the kill. Since the damage is always the same, I like to use heal because it costs the least FP of all of the AoE heals. If you execute this strategy correctly, then you will defeat the Revenant before it even has a chance to hit you. The quartet of Magic Fortification, Flame Fortification, Lightning Fortification, and Divine Fortification is what I like to call the Resistance Crew. This is our main tool to counterpick the damage that each of the game's enemies and bosses will do. They provide resistances to magic, fire, lightning, and holy damage respectively. You should always have one of these active if you want to increase your chances of survival. They are cheap to cast, costing very little FP, and they last a considerable amount of time, taking into consideration how much of a defensive boost they represent. Each of these incantations will leave you with about 45% absorption against the chosen damage type, depending on what kind of armor you choose. Of course, mileage may vary, but it is always a good choice to have these on. It is very important to know what you're up against so that you can help yourself survive the battle. Flame Cleanse Me is one of the most powerful incantations in the game. It provides a fast, cheap way to get rid of poison, and most importantly, Scarlet Rot. This should always be in your list of spells. Scarlet Rot is extremely annoying, and so is poison. This is especially harmful in Elden Ring because due to the size of the game and all of the exploration that we do, having a damage over time debuff like poison or Scarlet Rot is really bad for your resource management. Obviously, you also have the option of using items to remove these conditions, but I personally do not want to deal with the crafting system and gathering materials. Furthermore, it is good to note that this incantation deals a very minuscule amount of fire damage to yourself when you cast it. The damage itself is insignificant, but it is still fire type damage. This means that we can use this incantation to also remove the effects of frostbite. Flame Cleanse Me is always there and available to support you. At only 12 faith requirement, it is too good to pass up, and there is no reason to not use it in every build that you make. The last thing that we have left to go over is the different possibilities we have when choosing a roar, and what kind of utility these options bring to the build. On your screen right now, you are seeing 5 roar type Ashes of War that we can take advantage of with this character. These 5 roars can be used with most weapons available to the build. There are other roar type techniques with other weapons, but these you see right now are the most versatile ones. You might have noticed that some of these affect our character while others are actual attacks. Most of these are close quarter tools, while there is one exceptional ranged option. All in all, there is variation to choose from, and it is impossible to ignore that your choice of roar will determine your playstyle. While there may be some choices that are better than others, there are reasons to use them all, depending on what the player prefers. That being said, we do need to make a very clear distinction between buff type roars and attack type roars. The reason for this is because each type of roar is affected by a different talisman. So, when you choose your favorite roar type technique, you are also choosing part of your talisman setup. Let's take a look at this. First up, we have the buff type roars. There are 3 of them, and while they have similar functions, they also do have their differences. The 3 buff type roars are Warcry, Barbaric Roar, and Braggart's Roar. Warcry and Barbaric Roar are actually very similar. They have the same FP cost, the same duration, and they have very similar effects. When you activate them, your character will get a damage boost as well as a strength boost. Not only this, but your charged R2 attacks will be enhanced, with more damage and different effects. If you're using Warcry, your new charged R2 will have your character push forward while dragging their weapon and swinging it at the peak of their run. On the other hand, Barbaric Roar has the character dash forward and do a 3-hit combo. These new charge attacks can be used when one-handing or two-handing your weapon. Then there is Braggart's Roar. On paper, this is the best buff type roar. It costs the same as the other 2, but it lasts longer and it has better effects. This roar increases your damage, your defense, and your stamina recovery. You will do more damage, you will take less damage, and you will be able to swing your weapon more times. It is an all-around buff. Furthermore, this roar also gives you the enhanced charged R2s. In this case, it is the same as Warcry, the advancing charge R2. The only difference is that with Braggart's Roar, you can only take advantage of this new R2 if you are two-handing the weapon. If you use your weapon with one hand, you will get the original R2s. In the end, it will depend on this. If you do not need the enhanced charged R2s on one-handed weapons, then Braggart's Roar is definitely better. On the other hand, you might consider one of the prior 2. In any case, if you choose one of the buff type roars, all of the enhanced charged R2s that they give the player will be buffed by the Axe Talisman. This talisman will give your enhanced R2s an additional 15% damage on top of the increase from the Ash of War. Not only this, but the boost from the Axe Talisman will stack with the boost from the Roar Talisman and from the Highland Axe. This signifies a multiplicative 42% additional damage on all of the enhanced R2s that you get from these Ashes of War. If you plan on running a playstyle that heavily relies on relentless offense and charged R2s, then you should be using one of these. Next are the attack type roars. As you have seen earlier in the video, these 2 are my favorites and I choose to run them. These are the Troll's Roar and the Beast's Roar. In the latest patch, Troll's Roar received the buff, and now deals more damage and has more advantageous poise activation timing. This makes it easier to time it so that we can tank an enemy's hit and counterattack with the full Ash of War. That being said, the most useful and powerful characteristic of this roar is the incredible stance-breaking capabilities that it has. The roar has 2 parts. First, the initial shockwave. Probably the best part of this build, this shockwave knocks enemies down and deals 40 points of poise damage. This is enough to stance break most regular enemies. The second part of the skill can be activated by an R2, and it has your character attack the enemy with a slam down weapon attack. This attack does as much stance damage as the weapon you have equipped. In the case of this build, we add the 40 from the shockwave plus the attack from the butchering knife, and we get a combination that can stance break almost all large enemies in the game, including bosses. The best part is that after they are stance broken, we can riposte the enemy and set up the Ash of War again to repeat for a second stance break. It is very easy to loop enemies into a full lockdown state. You just need enough FP. As for Beast's Roar, this is probably one of the best ranged tools in the game. Low cost, long range, and incredible damage. Do not be surprised if you deal over 1000 damage with each of these roars. It has a quick startup and the capability of being spammed, turning it into a screaming machine gun of unadulterated carnage. It is the perfect tool to deal with enemies that we cannot reach with melee attacks, but it is also a fantastic technique to use in order to weaken enemies as they are charging you, or to thin out a larger group of enemies in order to make it easier to deal with. This Ash of War synergizes very much with the Dexterity stat because it gets much stronger when used from a weapon that has the Keen affinity. This is the reason why I place it on my offhand Highland Axe. With a very cheap 10 FP cost, this Ash of War lets you scream into scream into scream again and again until there are no more enemies in your path. The best part about these two attacks is that they complement each other, so you can use them efficiently and together in the same build. The buff type roars all serve a very similar purpose, so you really are just picking one of the three. Here, with attack types, they all have their time to shine, and this is why I prefer them. The more options you have, the stronger your build is. In any case, as these two are attack types, and it is the actual Ash of War that deals the damage, they receive a 15% damage boost from the Shard of Alexander. Furthermore, this buff stacks with the others from the Roar Medallion and the Highland Axe. All of this amounts to a total of 42% additional damage on each Troll's Roar and on all Beasts' Roar. If your idea is to run a build that can adapt to different situations, then this is the setup that you want to take advantage of. I am not the type of player that likes to use katanas or curved swords or other traditional dexterity weapons. I am more of a strength guy. Fortunately, Elden Ring has a lot of variety and options. There are Dexterity Greatswords, Dexterity Great Axes, and even Dexterity Colossal Swords. This means that I can take advantage of the full power of this stat, but not be forced to use weapons that I do not enjoy. As a result, we get this build. Full dexterity investment, but still running the big boy weapons. Thanks to the different options that we have from the roars, I was able to find a fun setup that also provides a lot of power. This build is truly strong. Combining the stance break capabilities that it brings to the table with Misericord means that we can deal thousands upon thousands of damage with a simple 22 FP investment. We can lock down enemies, we can snipe enemies, and we can deal with any situation that the game throws our way. The best part of this build is that it is a fully optimized build that acts like it put all of its points into strength. And that is just way too much fun. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I get to see you on the next one.